think simple Google search or Chat GPT search on Bing.
All right. When it's on Bing.
Yeah, when it's on Bing, will help you find the way, find something that is of interest to you. I don't know why. Like, I should be a recruiter for biotech. I mean, I don't know. I keep talking about recruiting people, but we see it. We see exciting things going on. Hey, Karl, what's up?
Hey, Erum, all is good. How about you?
I'm doing well. Wow, I can't believe we finished a season of a podcast.
We are up to how many episodes?
This is our 10th episode.
Amazing. And we've had 1,000 listens, which we've been told is really good for a new podcast. So thank you to all our listeners for listening and supporting us and sharing the podcast with other people.
I've been getting some feedback. We've been going to events. We went to a biotech event earlier this week, and I was like, I work with Karl, we're from Messaging Lab. I'm like, wait, do you guys have the Grow Everything podcast? Are you a co-host? And I'm like, why, yes. So I'm like, feel famous now.
Right. Well, we won't be famous until we're recognized on the street by total strangers.
Okay, not at a biotech event.
At a biotech event, though, that counts. I was in Boston earlier in the week. We went to go see our friends at Cultivarium, and we met with a couple of clients. I went to an event that was a biotech / climate tech event, which I think is going to be something that we talk a lot more about going forward. But it was interesting to see how many people were there. It was a very packed room in an incubator space. I don't think I should be surprised how many people are interested in that kind of intersection between biotech and climate tech.
We're living through this climate destabilization. People are looking for solutions. Besides, of course, minimizing our impact, not over consuming materials and just dumping them in a junkyard. What are some other ways that we can fix the climate? Because if we don't, I mean, I don't know, it's kind of a sad thing to think about. But
Right. Let's not think about that.
But the thing is, when there's big problems, you have to come with solutions. And it's a big opportunity and there's value to be made there, right? So
yeah,
if people come up with a solution, they will be set.
Right. Well, and I think the biotech industry very much demonstrated how quickly it can work during the COVID pandemic. The virus was sequenced within a couple of weeks. That was made public. The first vaccine candidates were created just a couple of weeks after that. By the end of 2020, there were more than 100 vaccine candidates. That was something that had never been seen before. And by early 2021, we had a vaccine that had been tested. And subsequently, those vaccines are among the most tested drugs ever created. So biotech demonstrated that it could flex, people could come together. Scientists, I think, loved collaborating across companies, across institutions, across borders. And in a way, I'm not the only one who said this, the pandemic and that effort was a demonstration of what is possible and what needs to be done to really address the climate crisis.
Yeah, well, I mean, COVID was a clear and present danger where the climate crisis is unclear to some people and not present. It's a little bit long term, although it is becoming more present when people are experiencing really big climate events, when it is warm in January in New York City, and you're like,
Yeah.
But to rally that quickly, I'm sure that scientists were really excited because of the urgency and the ability to see the results of their work quickly, because oftentimes, especially in biopharma and pharmaceuticals, it takes decades for something to be made. But this turned around in a year for COVID vaccine. So, wow, what an amazing feeling to be able to create something that can help humanity so fast.
Right. You mentioned we're in New York. It's like almost 50 degrees. It's the end of January. We've seen no snow this year. We personally went up to the Adirondacks last week and there was little snow. The lake that we go to, Scroon Lake, was only half frozen. Normally, you would have people ice fishing, riding their snowmobiles, cross-country skiing. And then on top of that, in California, they're having these crazy rainstorms and they're calling it climate whiplash because it's going from these extreme droughts to these crazy rainstorms. And I remember this book, Ministry of the Future, where they talk about California experiencing this tremendous rainstorm that ends up flooding the LA basin. And I was always like, that's very imaginative. That's never going to happen. And now seeing these kind of rainstorms, I'm starting to go, that actually is reality. And we need a lot of green infrastructure, water management, more ways to pull carbon out of the atmosphere. And then you mentioned the timelines associated with biotech development and drug discovery or drug development. That's very long, but I think we could see some very fast solutions created when it comes to biotech in climate tech solutions.
Yeah. And like worldwide, it was really great to speak with Paul Fremont. That was our last episode. He was involved in a lot of international efforts to teach more countries about synthetic biology and how they can use it locally to solve some of their more acute problems that are just related to them, which is amazing to be able to put a technology like synthetic biology or biotech in the hands of people that might not have used it before, but all of a sudden they come up with a solution that is cost efficient, that is reproducible and safe. And that's what I've been seeing more recently when we're talking to these founders like Axel and Shara, and we'll come back around to how amazing they are and what they're doing. But I think Paul did a great job of setting up the scene.
We talked a little bit with Paul about what it looks like when a place that doesn't have a technology leapfrogs with a technology. And I think that's something I want to explore more with people in future episodes. It'll be fascinating to see how that works out with biotechnology. I'm really curious to see what kinds of things are being developed locally to solve local problems. In Africa, we've got friends who are in Uganda and in Kenya, as Paul mentioned. I want to see how they use biotech to solve problems. But those conversations with Paul and Megan, I felt were really incredible to set up what the state of biotech is. And we've got some interviews that are going to continue that thread, specifically, I think, with John Cumbers, who runs SymBioBeta and who co-authored What's Your Biostrategy with me. John has a very broad view of what's happening in the SynBio space. So I think it's going to be really good to have him on and really pick his brain in terms of what he's excited about and what he sees as going on in the world. Was there any huge revelations for you from this first season?
I think every episode was a revelation in and of itself. And that's for me, again, someone that's working in the space every day. I hope it is for our listeners too. But as a former entrepreneur founder, I really enjoyed listening to Shara, Axel, Alexis, what they're doing, like building these products out, like how much work it takes to do what they're doing. Their disposition is like they're very positive. They're very excited. They know what they're doing is going to be very valuable to the world. Yeah, biotechnology is hard, but there's a way to make it easier and get it done.
Right. I agree with you. After we had posted the Axel interview, Axel being the co-founder of Polybion, the company that's producing a biomaterial from agricultural waste, my sister, who's been listening, she texted me, scale, and more scale, which is the way he opened the episode. And he said that was the thing that any biotech founder had to be focused on. And it's interesting because you and I have been talking about this, not in the podcast, but I think the statistic from 2019 is that the total, let's just say, value of biologics in the world, produced biologics, meaning potentially biological medicines, enzymes that are used industrially, is $300 billion. So that's like more than the GDP of many countries, $300 billion. But if you were to consider how big of a product that is, we could probably say it's 100 liters or 200 liters. It's not a huge volume. So the amount of value that's being created in biotechnology is potentially huge. I know a lot of it is that's medicines, and medicines are very expensive and they require a lot of precision to manufacture and purify. But when you start to talk about personal care products like Shara is talking about, or leather products like Axel's talking about, or other personal care products like we're going to talk about in future episodes, you don't need the same kind of biomanufacturing infrastructure, and you can scale, again, not easily, you can scale in a way that can have a big impact in an industry or in a community.
Right. Scaling means a lot of things. Let's talk about Axel and Alexis. For their company to scale, they have to use a lot of waste, right? There's so many wins in their whole process, taking all of that waste and being able to create a high value material like leather, and their material that process of scaling is amazing, especially for a product like Polybion is making.
Right. Iowa is a big biotech hub in the United States. Most people wouldn't know that. A lot of it has to do with the amount of corn that is grown there, but there's a lot of agricultural waste there. And actually, this company, Spiber, who produces spider silk, they started in Japan. They were at a certain point one of Japan's biggest startups. They are creating facilities in Thailand and in Iowa to scale production of their spider silk product. So in many ways, it makes sense to be in those places where you've got that biomass. And at this climate tech biotech thing I was at earlier in the week, there were people talking about how do you get away from sugar? How do you take existing biomass, say from the forest, and turn it into a product that can be used as biomass? Because there is a lot of biomass that surrounds us. We talk about garbage in New York City. I think the number that might be inaccurate is 50,000 tons a day. I don't know how much of that is organic waste, but biotech is one solution to that problem. And that's someone who I really want to try to get on this podcast is someone from the New York Department of Sanitation, specifically the woman who runs it, to talk about what they do, what happens to all that organic waste, and where are the biotech entrepreneurs that are addressing that.
Yeah. That's the circular economy, right? A lot of people talk
Exactly.
about it's a cycle. It's an ecosystem. Yeah. There is no waste. Something's always used.
Right, exactly. There is no waste in nature. You know what's interesting, and I think you have found this out to be true. For some reason, it's taken me longer to realize it, is that when you're around many biopharma people, they have no idea what's going on outside of biopharma. Like they don't really know that there's this whole other world of biotechnology that is being created and the amount of value that's being created there. Yes, the value continues to be in biopharma because of how expensive those products are. But you and I have both had the experience where we talk about what we do and people from biopharma just have no idea.
Yeah, they don't. I mean, it takes a lot of work to make a medicine, but when they find out, they see the gears turning in their head and they're like, wait, I could be in a different industry. Because it is brutal. I was in pharma. It can get really brutal across all of the divisions, whether you're in the lab or marketing or compliance. It takes a toll. But you do learn a lot about regulation. You learn a lot about how long it takes for a product to be developed, all the checks and balances that need to happen. When you're in the synthetic biology space, of course, there's a lot of that too. But maybe it's a little less red tape when you're talking about personal care products or creating materials or other technology, like Ellen's technology of using spores to do DNA barcodes.
Right.
You know, it makes people think about what opportunities are ahead of them or right next to them.
Right.
They can jump careers if they need to or want to.
As we record this, there's lots of tech layoffs happening for better or for worse. I think part of that is a result of companies overhiring, probably right before the pandemic or during the pandemic. But there's a lot of people out there who could be joining this industry if they knew more about it. And even there's biotech companies that are laying off people. And my feeling is a lot of those people are going to end up in really interesting companies or startups being started. We've not seen the pace of startups slow down. We've been talking to some really interesting, stealthy companies that are coming into the space that are all doing very interesting, potentially world-changing things. So there's a lot of talent out there that they can tap into.
Yeah. And if we're talking about tech talent, these people are naturally really curious. They have to learn fast because you have to learn different coding languages and different processes all the time. They're primed to be working in biotech because a lot of biotech, of course, is developing software too and be able to automate some of these experiments. So you're not just doing a lot of wet lab biology. They should go to GenSpace.
Yeah, GenSpace is a good place to get a taste of what is going on in this industry. You and I haven't talked about it in the podcast, but we talk about how there's all these like mid-career people, meaning people who are like in their, let's just say late 30s, early 40s, maybe even into their 50s, who are very talented people that would be looking for their next challenge. And this industry would be a great place for them if they knew more about it, if they knew how they could fit in, if we could help them. I'd like to think that this is one of the things that we're doing is like we're helping people understand what's going on in this industry, hopefully sparking some great conversations. And we've had some good conversations with people who've listened to the podcast, but getting more people interested in potentially joining these companies. It used to be that if you didn't have biopharma experience, you weren't going to get into any biotech company. But I think that has very much changed because biotech isn't just biopharma.
Right. There are different needs for the synthetic biology company. In the Shara episode, she mentioned her and her team do a lot of classes online that are like about synthetic biology or fermentation, being able to immerse yourself in a certain topic. And there are many. I mean, when we're just speaking with Paul Fremont, he's talking about the omics technology. There's just so much going on there too. I think a simple Google search or Chat GPT search on Bing
All right. When it's on
will,
Bing.
yeah,
Yeah.
when it's on Bing, will help you find the way, find something that is of interest to you. I don't know why. Like, I should be a recruiter for biotech. I mean, I don't know. I keep talking about recruiting people, but we see it. We see exciting things going on, and we work with a lot of the executives on strategic communications. There's tons of opportunities. There's a lot of capital being raised. So they are flush with cash and they're looking for talented, enthusiastic, curious, creative people. And it seems like there are a lot of them out there looking for jobs.
Right. And they don't know that this is even a possibility. I've given a few talks at schools, mostly high schools, and kids are typically blown away by the things that we mentioned about how things are being grown, how they could potentially be grown. And those audiences are really tough. The kids ask a lot of questions that we don't have answers to, but I think it's really important to get out there to talk to them. And I'm super excited that like in our next season, we'll be talking to a couple of people who are out there in the education space, talking about how do we create this workforce of the future.
Where's the representation of synthetic biology and biotech in the mainstream culture and the mainstream, I don't say mainstream media? Actually, the news doesn't really cover it too much unless it's something bad. Actually, of course, COVID had covered it,
Yeah.
but they didn't really label the vaccine as a synthetic biology process.
Typically, what happens in the media is biotech gets or just science in general gets a bad rap. It's rarely portrayed positively. It's like 8 out of 10 times is a negative portrayal. We've talked about Unnatural Selection on Netflix,
Yes.
which we added to we're calling it a culture club, which is a book club, but with movies and TV shows and events that we'll share with our audience on this show and then also online. And the first piece is Unnatural Selection, which is a 4-part series on Netflix, which covers a lot of gene editing work. And Josiah Zahner's on it, and Jennifer Doudna, who's one of the co-founders, co-discoverers is really the right term, of the CRISPR system, which has revolutionized all life science research. And she is a co-winner of the Nobel Prize for her work.
People definitely join our culture club. For those that are not in the biotech community, it is a play on the word culture because you have to culture microorganisms and like ferment them. But of course, we're talking about the culture of biology and biotech and how that affects our everyday lives. So yes, Unnatural Selection has been a great docuseries. I've learned so much. They have everyday families struggling with rare disease. There's a solution out there. They talk about drug pricing, which is a crazy situation. We need to get an expert on here to unpack it.
Agree.
Like, why is it $750,000 for a gene therapy?
$3.2 million is another one I saw.
For one treatment?
Yeah, one treatment.
Why even put it for sale? Like, you didn't do the numbers correctly. Like,
Right.
I have so many questions. Like, you didn't get
It's
the economics right.
It's definitely a loaded topic.
That's why we are having this culture club, because we want another way for people to talk about a very specific topic. We have our podcast, but all these other creators, like those that created Unnatural Selection, have their own view, or they're presenting a case for biotechnology. And we want to talk about that specifically. We want to have a more open discussion. How we're going to actually, this is now I'm spitballing, but we can do like a webinar. And if you want to join, and we can talk about what we read or view or watch.
When I first read Culture Club, I couldn't help but think of the 80s band with Boy George singing.
We know. I mean, we love 80s. Hello, the theme music to this podcast is a bit synthwave.
Yeah. It's funny because when I was in Boston, so visiting Cultivarium, one of the things that I find really creative is the way companies name their conference rooms. And at Cultivarium, they're named after famous microbiologists. And then I went to go to Asimov, and all their conference rooms are named after famous spaceships from science fiction movies. And then we've been to places where they're named after dinosaurs. So it's just another way that the kind of creativity permeates into the industry. But we have a long list of books and shows and programs and series that actually we should talk to our friend Julie Wolf, because Julie has like a list of songs that she's curated that are all about biology or biotech. So we need to get Julie on to talk about what she's doing these days, but also to specifically get her to share the list with us.
I wonder if she has a podcast playlist. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, because Julie used to host American Society of Microbiology podcast. I don't know if she's ever made that playlist public. So Julie, let us know because we want to know about the playlist.
She's a pro, so she's on this before. It'd be great to have her on. We have some amazing episodes coming up with guests that are really making huge waves in synthetic biology. So we have John Cumbers, your best friend, and What's Your Bio Strategy? And we have Suzanne Lee. She's like one of the first people that have been widely recognized in using kombucha SCOBY.
Yeah, kombucha SCOBY, using it as a material for fashion. So if you do a search for Suzanne Lee and do an image search, you'll see some of the leather jackets she created using that material. So she's amazing.
Yeah, can't wait to talk to her on this podcast. Everyone's in for a treat. We have people that have started companies, now they're venture capitalists, people that are building more biotech communities, similar to what Beth at GenSpace has done. So there's a lot of exciting things coming up.
Like I said at the beginning, we've reached 1,000 listeners. So thank you to all of you. Now we can say we're the fastest growing biotech podcast. There are several others, which we will giving shout outs to in future episodes and inviting some of those hosts to come and talk to us about their podcast. We would love to have you share. We do have a Patreon page. We got our first Patreon subscriber, which we very much appreciate. And it's a pleasure to be doing this podcast with you, Erum. I'm looking forward to our next 20 episodes.
Yes, stay tuned.